Ashes of Creation has now been on Steam for about 4 weeks. That's long enough for the launch hype to fade a bit and for real patterns to start showing up. So instead of guessing or arguing based on feelings, this video is about looking at the actual numbers we have right now. We're going to look at player counts and concurrency, reviews and sentiment, estimated revenue, and finally what all of this might mean over the next 6 months. Before we start, I want to be very clear about one thing. Numbers don't tell us if a game is good or bad. What they do tell us is how a project is behaving. Is it stable? Is it shrinking? Is it holding interest? Or is it swinging wildly? All of the numbers in this video come from SteamDB and from exported datasets tied to Steam activity. That includes player concurrency, follower counts, and a full scrape of Steam reviews. But it's important to understand what this data cannot tell us. First, concurrency does not mean active gameplay. Steam counts players who are AFK fishing, sitting at the login screen, or even just leaving the launcher open. Second, owner counts are estimates, not official sales numbers. Different tracking sites use different models, which is why you'll see ranges instead of one exact number. Third, reviews are only a sample of players. Most players never leave a review at all. And finally, free keys matter. A large number of Ashes players owned access before Steam and received the Steam version for free. That affects both review counts and ownership estimates. So every number you hear today is directional, not definitive. Player counts and concurrency. Let's start with the big headline number. Ashes of Creation reached an all-time peak Steam concurrency of 31,882 players, which happened on December 14th. Steven Sharif has previously said he hoped for around 50,000 concurrent players. So based on Steam numbers alone, Ashes received a little over 60% of that target. That's not a failure, and that's not a runaway hit either. It's a solid mid-range launch for a paid early access MMO. At launch, Ashes of Creation started with 6 servers. 2 days after launch, a 7th server called Vira was added to help with population pressure. So when we say the game peaked at about 32,000 concurrent players, that number is not on one server. It's split across 7. Steven Sharif has previously stated that the target concurrency was about 5,000 players per server. If you multiply that out across 7 servers, that target would be about 35,000 concurrent players. From that perspective, a peak just under 32,000 concurrent players is actually very close to what was previously described as a healthy target. This also lines up with what we've seen historically during Alpha 2. During Alpha 2 Phase 1, the game also launched with 6 servers. Steven reported that one server reached around 6,000 concurrent players, while the remaining servers were expected to be around 3,000 concurrent players each. That would put the total concurrency during the phase somewhere in the low to mid 20,000s. Keep in mind, at this time, Ashes of Creation was not released on Steam, but instead managed entirely by the studio itself. Later, during Alpha 2 Phase 2, Steven stated that one server reached between 7,000 and 8,000 concurrent players during a time when they had 3 servers. This was before a major server merge. Eventually, multiple servers were merged into a single server called Shoal, which reached a peak of about 8,100 concurrent players in early May. So historically, Ashes has already demonstrated that individual servers can support 6,000 to 8,000 players at once, depending on the phase and infrastructure. When you compare that to Steam launch numbers, the picture becomes clearer. The start of Alpha 2 Phase 1 carried a total concurrency of around 21,000 players across 6 servers. That number declined over time to a total of 8,000 just prior to the start of Phase 3. Steam Early Access peaked around 32,000 and has started to settle in the mid-20,000s. So while Steam has produced in total a higher concurrency, it has not been by much, only about 5,000 players based on available data. It's also important to remember that Steam concurrency includes players who are AFK fishing, sitting in menus, or leaving the launcher open. Even during server downtimes, the concurrency has never dropped below 4,000. That means the number of players actively moving around the world at any given moment is lower than the raw Steam number suggests. Now let's talk about reviews, because this is where a lot of arguments happen, and also where context matters the most. At a glance, Ashes of Creation sits at around 63% recommended on Steam. That puts it in the mixed to positive range. But that single number hides something important. A large portion of these reviews come from players who did not buy the game on Steam. About 1/3 of all reviews, roughly 33%, are marked as received for free. These are players who already owned Ashes of Creation before Steam launch and were granted Steam access automatically. When looking at this group alone, it is 78% recommended, much higher than the new buyers. So to understand how new buyers feel, we need to separate these groups. When we remove the reviews marked received for free and look only at new Steam purchasers, the recommended percentage changes to 57%. New buyer sentiment is different from legacy player sentiment. This matters because legacy players tend to have more history, higher expectations, and more long-term frustrations, while new players are reacting to first impressions, onboarding, and performance. Playtime helps explain why reviews look the way they do. Across all reviews, the average playtime at the moment of review is about 30 hours. But when we separate old players from new Steam buyers, the difference becomes clear. Legacy players, the ones who receive the game for free, tend to have much higher playtime at the time they leave a review. Many of them have dozens and sometimes hundreds of hours already invested. Their reviews often focus on long-term systems, balance, or design direction. New Steam buyers, on the other hand, usually review the game with far fewer hours played. Their feedback is more likely to focus on performance, server stability, clarity of systems, and whether the game feels worth the price right now. When we look at total lifetime playtime, not just playtime at review, the gap is even wider. Legacy players overwhelmingly have higher total hours, which means their reviews reflect a very different relationship with the game than someone buying it for the first time on Steam. This is why lumping all reviews together can be misleading. Another important data point is refunds. There are reviews that are marked as both refunded and reviewed. This number is small compared to total reviews, but it's still worth calling out. At the time of this recording, there were 288 refunds. When looking at review rates and ownership data, we can reasonably estimate there were between 5,000 and 8,600 Steam buyers who were funded. Most refunded reviews also show some amount of playtime, meaning these players didn't instantly bounce. They played long enough to form an opinion, then decided the game wasn't for them. Refunds at this stage usually point to performance issues, unmet expectations, or confusion, not necessarily to fraud or bad faith. Now let's talk about money. SteamDB shows several ownership estimates based on different tracking models. These estimates range roughly from 200,000 owners on the low end to 350,000 owners on the high end. However, there's a big complication. It's widely stated that around 150,000 players already owned Ashes of Creation access before Steam. Those players did not have to purchase the game through Steam. So the real question is, how many of those estimated owners are actually new purchases? To handle this honestly, we need scenarios. In a conservative scenario, most Steam owners are legacy players and new sales are limited. In a middle scenario, ownership is split between legacy players and new buyers. In a high scenario, Steam brought in a large number of new purchases beyond the existing base. Using these ranges, we can estimate gross revenue, then subtract Steam's 30% cut. From there, we apply cosmetic spending. If we take the $49.99 price tag, knowing there was a 2-week sale at $42.99, we would get an estimate of $10,450,000 to $17,890,000 from game sales. Now we must recognize that due to prior owners and the initial sale price of the game, these are overestimates. From there, we can remove Steam's 30% cut, and this range changes to a range of $7,315,000 to $12,523,000. We should also take into account cosmetic sales. Using industry standards of the average spend per cosmetic buyer, along with the number of estimated players, we can range anywhere from a conservative estimate of $1.3 million to $8 million, with a solid middle ground of $3.4 million. When combining these two, that brings us to an estimate of $10.7 million to $16 million. But we must again keep in mind that a significant number of Steam owners are not new owners. Using the number of reviews from known legacy owners, we can estimate that 15 to 20% of Steam owners are legacy players who already own the game before launch and did not buy it again. Using that ratio, we can break down the main ownership estimates. On the low end, Gamealytic estimates about 215,000 total owners. That likely includes around 35,000 to 40,000 legacy players, leaving roughly 170,000 new Steam buyers. In the middle, PlayTracker estimates about 290,000 owners. That breaks down to roughly 48,000 to 52,000 legacy players and about 235,000 new buyers. On the high end, VG Insights estimates around 365,000 owners. That would suggest about 60,000 to 65,000 legacy players and roughly 295,000 new Steam buyers. That would then change the total revenue to between $9.3 and $13.7 million, taking into account the Steam cut and cosmetic sales. Stephen Sharif has stated that the studio currently has a burn rate of around $800,000 per week or around $3.2 million per month. So instead of asking how much money did Ashes make, the better question is how many months of development does this likely fund? Depending on which scenario you believe, the Steam launch likely funds between 3 to 5 months of development, but not years, and that's okay. Early access is about sustaining progress, not finishing the game overnight. What does this mean for the next 6 months? There are 3 realistic paths forward. One path is stabilization and gradual improvement. Player counts flatten, reviews slowly improve, and updates rebuild trust. Another path is slow decline, where unresolved issues push players away faster than new ones arrive. The third path is patch-driven spikes, where major updates bring players back temporarily, followed by drop-offs. Which path Ashes follows depends less on marketing and more on performance, content cadence, and communication. The numbers don't tell us if Ashes of Creation will succeed. They tell us where it is right now. 4 weeks in, Ashes is not collapsing, and it's not exploding either. It's in the difficult middle phase where consistency matters more than hype. Currently, Ashes of Creation has a concurrency that is not much higher than Alpha 2 Phase 1, and the revenue generated will likely fund 3 to 5 months of development time. Does that leave us on a short clock? I really don't know, but we should find out soon enough. Stephen Sharif has said in the month of January they will tell us more information about the upcoming beta and release. If you like this video, please give me a like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in Vera.